to send you any of the information that's a part of this PowerPoint presentation, and just make sure there's my contact information on the back of that. You can easily get in touch with me. But grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk about this current next generation, and then having some discussion in some groups this morning about, okay, so what does this mean in our ministry? I just want to start off by telling you that this is what I think happens. I think most times when people start to speak, when they start to talk in front of a group, the very first thing they usually do is they usually start by, they might not use these words, but they start by saying how cool they are, all right? So I just want to put this out there right now. I'm not cool. I don't pretend to be cool, and I'd like to prove to you that I am not cool, all right? So a couple of years back, like 6 years ago, we have a gal on Facebook, high school girl that's going to be on an Operation Barnabas team. And so she kind of interacts with, she has no idea I'm the team leader. She has no idea I'm the director of Operation Barnabas. And so she asked to be my Facebook friend and all this stuff. And I find this out later, that she told her friend, she said, I don't know who this Timothy Kurtaneck is, but I am going to be his special friend. And her friend goes, what do you mean you're going to be his special friend? Why? She goes, this guy is so awkward. He's not going to have any friends the entire summer, but I will be his friend. And this is my Facebook picture that I had posted. This is my high school graduation picture. So that was it. I would just like for you to know, I do believe that three-piece corduroy suits are going to come back in style. I believe that. Why would you be in Southern California growing up and wear a three-piece corduroy suit? I have no idea whatsoever, but that was so. She is still my very special friend, and she took good care of me this summer. I do want to brag how not cool I am, because I was not an All-American in college. I did not do any of that. But I did play a little college soccer. One of my favorite times showing this to our youth group, there's a little gal right up front. She leans over and she goes, which one's TK? Okay, do you really need to look? Which one? Usually you hear stuff and you just blow right through it and just laugh. I had to stop, put myself down and laugh. I'm like, what do you mean? I had a little more hair there, that's when shorts were short, all right? That was it. I do want to brag to you, hold your applause, please. In a collegiate match, I did score 2 goals in one game. Yeah. Thank you. Now, there's a little more to the story. Both of them were against my own team. We're playing Azusa Pacific University. We're winning 3-0, so I got to go in the game. And my friend was not marking up right in the back, and I went running back there. Ball comes across. The other guy from the other team and I hit the ball at the same time. Squirts off, goes the goal. We're winning 3-1. My team is hurt. I'm like, that was Gary's guy. It wasn't my guy. 3-1, still comfortable. Coach leaves me in. Keep playing. Same thing happens. 18-yard line, ball comes, boom, hits off me, goes right in the upper top corner. We're winning. We won 3-2. Thank you, Jesus. But we scored 5 goals that day. I never scored a goal in a college match for my team against it, but I did score 2 in one game. Find somebody who can say that. So, yeah. So when people say, "Were you like an All-American?" Yeah, no. I will say this, though. The older I get, the better I was. I was incredible, okay? Because that was a long, long, long time ago. If there is anything cool about me, though, I would have to tell you it's that I have been married to Dana for 27, almost 28 years. But there's a story with that as well. Ed was leading an Operation Barnabas team that I got to be a part of in 1988. And I was at Grace Church of Orange, and it was a session, a service, and Ed is introducing the leaders, and I'm running the soundboard. I'm acting like I know what I'm doing because I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing that thing. So he's announcing the leaders, and so he says my name. So I just stand up, wave, sit down. Well, the very first time that Dana ever saw me, she was in that church and grew up in that church. As soon as she looks back and sees me, she looks at her friend, and she said those 3 magic words when she met me and saw me for the first time. She looked at her friend, and she said, "What a dork." So true story. So if there's any coolness, it would be because of Dana, not because of me. That is a true story. We did get married in that church like 18 months later. So who's the dork now? Yeah. She's been paying for that ever since, all right? We do have 2 kids, Nick and Becca. And what is hilarious is we work with youth, and we work with youth leaders through many years. I started leading OB teams in 87, and they keep thinking that anybody who's been on OB as a leader and a student thinks of Nick and Becca as being about about 4 and 6 years of age. And so when they find out that Becca's 25 and applying to med schools, and they find out that Nick is 21, and in fact, we're texting back and forth this morning, he's trying to buy a house. They're like, your kids can't possibly. And so if there's anything cool about us, but both of them have these guys at home. Now, the only reason we ever show those pictures, like in youth group, is so all the girls will go, oh, kind of thing. So if you want to do that right now, really, yeah. So Bailey is on the right. We got him 2 days after Christmas, or Nick did. And we're really grateful Nick's looking at buying a house and moving out with his dog. That would be tremendous, terrific. And then Bentley is Becca's dog. He's a teacup Yorkie, and she rescued him, which means we rescued him. So he's 11 and a lot of fun, and they're good. They're enjoyable. Get the opportunity to talk through some things and do some things together with us that's talking about this next generation. And as we're looking at this idea, I want to go back and just do a little bit of a history kind of overview. Kind of a nerd when it comes to the whole social science thing, and when it comes to looking at past generations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there at all, but I think it's just helpful as we then talk about this current generation. As Dan and I were sitting at the airport eating our Chick-fil-A sandwich at BWI. It's really interesting. There are 4 people. They're all in IT, and they're talking, and your tables are about this far apart, right? And they're talking about people, and they're saying, oh, the millennials, da-da-da-da. And they said, one lady goes, I just heard that there's a new generation. It's called Generation Z. Have you guys ever heard that? No, they're like, no, we don't know that. And I looked over and I said, in fact, we're going to be talking about that with youth leaders over this retreat. And they're like, so there is such a thing? And the lady goes, please tell me they're better than the last one. I'm like, I'm not going to get into that a whole lot, but they were amazed. So I thought we'd take a little bit of a scan history, but you need to know that this is on the shoulders of a lot of other people's work. Dr. Jim Swanson, Dr. Tim Elmore, Sean McDowell, James Emery White, resources as well. I did get to view a podcast about a month or so ago that was really, really helpful. Very, very good, from Institute 360, Impact 360 Institute. Excuse me, I said that wrong. And they partnered with Barner Research. So all this is just a compilation, and I'm sure that you've seen a number of these pieces and just want to try and put some comprehensive things together just to help us. And then I think the value will be, so as we talk together, what does that mean? So if these things are true, generally true of a generation, what's that mean for our ministries? What does that look like? So again, if you like taking notes, great. If you don't, no big deal. It's just an outline. Here we go. About these generations, because some people react to this, but the reality is what you're talking about is generally these generations, as social scientists have looked at this, is it runs about 20 years. It's about 10 years solid, and it's a little fluffy and slimy on the first 5 years and the last 5 years. It's not exact science kind of stuff, but they don't change abruptly. It's changing sort of slowly, but transitioning. Another thing is that people may not like this kind of study because it seems to stereotype people. And let's be honest, that's not correct. People are individuals. That would be like saying our daughter likes hamburgers because she's an American. I mean, Americans like hamburgers. We tend to like that. Dana was teaching her a lesson when she was very, very young that she would order food and then not eat it. So her McDonald's hamburger, Dana pulled it out then instead of just for lunch, it was for dinner. And then the next morning for breakfast. And then the next noon, for lunch. And then she made her favorite meal for dinner, but she had to eat the hamburger. To this day, Becca does not eat hamburger, okay? So to say that all Americans like hamburgers, while generally correct, is not necessarily correct for every individual. Same thing will be true of these things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly true for but it is descriptive largely on the whole, okay? And then the last thing we're talking about, when we talk about formative years, not just the years they were born, but we talk about those formative years. Generally, you're talking about when people are age 10 to age 18. I think about my own parents who are now with Jesus, and looking back at what shaped them. My dad was the Great Depression. Grew up in Western Pennsylvania, go Steelers. But the reality is that shaped his life. My mother was born in England. Everyone's like, she had like an accent. It's like, oh yeah, because you just don't hear it after a while, But she grew up in England during World War II. Had 2 jobs when she was 14 years of age. Double-decker bus and another one. Raised in a... I mean, that marked... My mom had chocolate hidden everywhere in our home. They're like, can I go? Can I visit? The reality was my mom didn't eat it. She just saved it so that she could have it. Because she never did when she was growing up. Those things affect them and affect us to a great deal. looking at the whole overall birth cohort, usually 20, 22 years, and you'll see some of the history before we get into Gen Z, and that's kind of what's marked there as far as the years that are basically born, what we call the GI generation, the greatest generation, silent, boomers, X, millennials, or Y, and then we get to Z. So again, those are just some things that we're going to be talking about individually. So let's very quickly look at some of these pieces, some pictures and all of people that would be associated. This group is dying off. I mean, this group is largely moved on. The reason I wanted to show you the picture, did you notice who's kind of in this bottom left-hand corner? Billy Graham. I mean, he's the latest one. It's been really interesting. But part of that generation, and you recognize the folks. You got the Duke, and you got Jackie Robinson, and I mean, you got Walt Disney and the Bushes. So, anybody know who this is? The greatest Trojan? Yeah. Yeah, he actually came over to Grace College and spoke, and really interesting guy, and made a movie. Was it Unbroken? Yeah. So, Brokaw called this the greatest generation. Largely, that one has moved on now, but a lot of study was done on these folks, and boy, they really, really were. Next grouping about them, or things about them, you'll see the years they were born. In their 90s pretty much now. You're talking about those formative years. And then the words that describe them, whenever you think of this generation, you think of hard-working and patriotic. I mean, very patriotic, conservative fiscally. And then you can see the things that happened during their times. You have World War II, you have vaccinations, big deals, big deals. And then GI Bill incredibly affected our country and those people. So again, I'm more than happy to share this PowerPoint with you if you just put down a word or something and want to get it later. Totally fine. But words are hardworking, fiscally conservative. Those are the key ones when you think about this generation. But they're largely off the scene. So then you start moving into the next generation, which is called the silent generation, or builders. My in-laws are a part of this, Dana's folks. And who are the people you recognize here or don't recognize here? There's some faces. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting, Bill Cosby is a part of that. Yeah. Barbara. Yep. Marilyn. Yeah, many, those are not with us. Yeah, some are. Some things about this silent generation. Real interesting. Those are the years, right? 29 to 45, so up to World War II kind of thing. Words that describe them: duty, tradition, loyalty, and passive. That's an interesting word. They were largely passive compared to the generation before them. They were very hardworking and active, but this generation was the word passive. No U.S. presidents came out of this generation. That's just a weird kind of dynamic. It really describes my father-in-law in many ways. Really is. He is that. Key events: Korean War, which most people forget about. Not saying it wasn't important, it wasn't, significant, but not a lot. A lot of helping professions, counseling professions, and then just about every person who was a major figure in the civil rights movement from this generation. So it's just a very different kind of thing. But the words that describe them as far as key for them: duty, tradition, loyalty, but passive. Passive. Well, let's keep moving on just a little bit. Come to the boomers. And by the way, every group thinks their generation is the best one, so this is the best one. All the boomers said, amen, let's do it. Bigger and better. So you recognize some people there. Do you recognize who that is now? It doesn't look anything like when he was born, but incredibly talented. Who are the other people you recognize there? Larry and Magic. Yeah. Simon and Garfunkel. Bridge over troubled water. Yeah. Interesting stuff. I will brag to you that I did get to go to the game 2 of the 87 finals between the Lakers and the Celtics, and it was awesome. It was great. It was incredible. It was. So boomers, all right? Bigger, better, that kind of thing. Oh, Charlie's Angels. That was a big deal kind of in the day. Yeah. So again, 46 to 64, a little bit 50s, 60s, that kind of thing. Words that describe boomers: tolerant, competitive, individuality, we live to work, and we're self-absorbed. And some of us are looking at that going, yeah, that's about right. And then those key events, the idea of the Vietnam War, women in leadership, the feminist movement, all those things, again, a part of the boomer generation. I'll never forget a friend of mine that was on youth staff with me. For Christmas, she just thought it was fun and ironic. But there was a poster of a guy in riding boots with a glass of champagne, $1 million home in the background, mansion kind of thing, leaning on the bumper of his Rolls Royce, and the caption said, "Poverty sucks." That was the gift she gave me, because the description was about the idea of bigger and better and self-serving. And that was the picture in a lot of ways, that the more money you have, the more comfortable you are, and it's all about you, and you can build yourself up by your own bootstrap. That's the boomer generation, all right? Now, next thing would be the Gen X. Who are those names you recognize? 65 to 83? Brad Pitt. There you go. Tiger, huh? Michael Jordan, right? Palin, and then you got some games down there. Yeah. Yep. Hey, Pong was awesome. Let me just tell you that back in the day, all right? And things about a 65 to 83, so 30s, 40s, somewhere in there, formative years, mid-70s. Words to describe the Gen X or busters: self-reliant, adaptive to technology, skeptical, cynical. Again, these are not my words, but in study, but cynical. I remember a guy who was at the high school I taught at named Timmy Wolf. Funny kid, but I remember this quote that he said. He said, "I'm a kid of the 80s. I got 4 working parents." They were called latchkey kids because they'd come home, mom, dad working, everybody's out. They took care of themselves when they got home and watched TV and ate snacks until mom and dad got there, and they were on their own. And it had an effect upon the way they've parented, which has an effect upon today. So again, some key events during that time: Soviet Union collapse, the whole AIDS crisis, gays in the military, Gulf War. Those are big pieces. And some of us with some date behind us are going, yep, remember all that, and the cynicism that comes with that time zone. Okay? Now, we move into the millennial, because again, we want to get towards Generation Z, as we were talking about. It's just good for background. But some of the events that affect millennials, you look through that and you kind of go, oh yeah. The decision. What was that for those that don't know? Yes.
That's when LeBron took his talents to South.
Took his talents to South Beach, yeah.
Oh, it's so
But there was no decision 2 when he went back to Cleveland, was there? Oh, yeah?
It was in between songs. You just heard the whole crowd.
But you see, I mean, I looked through this list and kind of went, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Katrina, Virginia Tech shooting. I mean, yeah, those are big pieces. No question about that. In fact, isn't Daniel the church planner in Bellefontaine? Wasn't he going to go to Virginia Tech? He's from New Zealand. And then his mom found out about that and said, you're not going to school there. And that's how he ended up going to Bryan, playing ball, coming to Christ. Now he's a church. I mean, so interesting how some of those things shake out. This is an interesting one. The mortgage bubble burst of 2008 and the recession has a lot to do with millennials and a lot to do with Gen Z, as we'll see. So as we get to some of these kinds of pictures, who are some of those faces that you recognize? Yeah. Shaun White does not look the same at all. But he can still win gold. The one like me who was an Olympic champion. Remember that? Yeah. So here we go with some things. Generally from 84 on, I think of 84 as recent because that was when the Olympics were in LA. That is like ancient history, right? A long time ago. So words that describe the idea of the millennial generation, the Y generation: optimistic, smart, love to self-broadcast, love to live. Live, then work.
The real best.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea of live and then work versus boomers, it was work and then you may do some living. Very, very different. Very techno-savvy, of course, and global. And some of you would go, oh yeah, I can see that, and even how that describes you in some ways. But optimistic, and then live, then work. Quite descriptive. All right?
We're taking the
Okay. Hey, you bet. Sounds good. About millennials, 80 to 100 million strong. It's the first generation that technologically they were smarter than the parents. It was always what parents would teach their kids, but the millennials, they knew so much more about technology is that the parents learned from the kids. It got flipped right there. So really kind of pretty interesting. So the question, and then we'll see, you guys remember these things. Economic prosperity, recession, Columbine, September 11th, war on terrorism, the whole Iraq situation, the war there. So again, you know that, you've lived that. And then, so here would be the question I would say, just for a moment, turn to the person next to you and say, so what are some reasons why that information, okay, it's not Gen Z, you're working with that group, but why is some of this information helpful to anybody who's involved in ministry? Why don't you talk about that for a minute, share some ideas, and then we'll move on and get into Generation Z. Why don't you talk about that just with somebody near you? So why is that information kind of helpful to know as you're in ministry? I always think you don't operate youth ministry in a vacuum. You don't only work with Generation Z. You're going to be working with their parents, a different generation, their grandmothers. Those that set policies in our congregations are not going to be Gen Z. So we're going to be working with all these. We better understand what the basic values of their groups are. Now, again, individuals are individuals, but generally we better be aware of those things. And then we better be helpful in explaining to those generations what the values of this next generation is that we're working with. And that's your job, is to be one who helps to interpret. You are the go-between to those adults. You're the go-between to those students, because it's going to be good for the body of Christ. And so that's a pretty big task, and it's a high calling. And that's what we're called to, and it's exciting. It really is. So let's talk about this Gen Z kind of thing. And Gen Z, other names that sometimes you'll read about will be homelanders, founders, centennials. But again, Z is probably the one. I did, by the way, find out, I just read this, maybe you are privy to this already. I heard someone refer to the generation coming after Gen Z as being called Alpha. Never heard that before. I'm like, okay, so I don't know if that will catch, if it'll stick, I don't know, but interesting. So what do we know about this coming generation? Well, actually, the generation that you work with. And some of these things, and again, some will say that they were born starting in 95 to 2010. You'll find other research like Barna refers to that as starting in 1999. So again, it's soft, but we get the idea as middle to late 90s. Okay? So that's probably important for us to know. And really, when you look at that and think about your ministry, it's the kids that we're working with, right? That's who this is. Some interesting information about this Gen Z. It makes up 25% of the U.S. population. So it's significant. It is significant, to say the least. Some facts about this Gen Z that I found interesting. I stole this from Sean McDowell, not to be confused with Josh McDowell. Thank you, Dave. But Gen Z, Ronald Reagan is as far in the past for them as Dwight Eisenhower was for their parents. That's a long time ago. Email is an ancient and useless technology. Columbine is merely a flower. Amazon is an online retailer, not a river in South America. This is one that'll hit some of us. The band Nirvana is classic rock. Okay, I want to get your input on this, Dane. Steph Curry is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan ever was.
I literally kicked the cat out of you.
No. YouTubers are the new stars. I love this one. Eminem and LL Cool J could show up at a parents' weekend at college. Whoa. Press pound on the phone is now translated as hashtag. And with GPS, this generation has never needed to ask for directions. Wow. So turn to the person next to you, and this is what you get to talk about just for a minute. From what you've worked with students, Gen Z, how would you describe them? What are words that would describe Gen Z in your experiences? Again, we're talking the generality, not necessarily specifics, stereotypes a little bit, but what is that? Why don't you talk together? What are some things? And then we'll look at what some of the research has shown out, and then we can say, wow, I agree with that, or go, so let's look at that. How would you describe this generation, high schoolers on down? I'm always interested in comparing what our experiences are with what the research says and finding what do we find right on? What do we find and go, oh, okay, that's where it's going. Do we disagree with that? I'm always intrigued by that, not just, oh, here's what Barna says, here's what James Emery White says, but what's our reaction, what's our experience in this, and then understanding that it's probably moving the way of some of what the research is saying more and more, but you're starting to see that in your youth groups if it's not there already. 4 things I think it would be important for us to know. This is actually from Barna Research and this Impact 360 Institute. 4 things that they say describe, and everybody you read on this stuff, that Sean McDowell has his words, and we'll also look at some others like Tim Elmore and what they say. But I thought these 4 things were really, really helpful of just being categories that describe this Generation Z. The first one would be this, is that they refer to them as screen agers. It's always fun because whenever you read this research, they always make up new words. It's just amazing. Tim Elmore makes up new words all the time to describe them. You're like, okay, you can make that say whatever you want then. So obviously it has something to do with using screens. Gen Z, the research says, uses their tablets, computers, whatever. 57% of students this age use those devices 4 hours or more every day. 4 hours or more every day. Well over half, 57%. Their parents use screens. So parents understand the use of screens, but not to this level, to this degree. Whereas generations before, parents were behind in this. Research says about this idea of screen agers that relationally they are a little more poorly equipped, and they are twice as likely as adults to be lonely. Which is amazing because you always hear about relationships and all, and yet those devices tend to isolate some people even though you're together with seeing the same stuff. So the idea of relationally ill-equipped, the idea of greater loneliness, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit further. So screen agers would be their word they made up, that they are technologically, that's there. Here's another one. Another one is extremely diverse in every way, shape, and form. In America, 63% are white. 2/5 are non-white. And right now, the most common last name in America is? Kurtaneck, yeah. I think there's 5 of us. Smith. In a couple years, the most popular name is going to be Rodriguez. Smith to Rodriguez, that transition is happening in this generation. 12%, or about 1 out of every 8, would identify as non-heterosexual. That's some significant numbers. 1 out of 8, 12% non-heterosexual is how they would identify. 33%, so 1 out of 3 of this generation say that sexuality is based on how you feel. So 1 out of 3, a third, is that idea of how I feel dictate. Well, isn't it Facebook that has 56 different categories that you can choose from to express your sexuality? And there's a list. There might even be more than that now. I don't know. So extremely diverse in every way, shape, and form. Here's another one. Career-driven. I don't know if you've seen this or started seeing this yet. I was pretty intrigued by this. They really have been marked by the recession in 2008, 2009. And so they're a little fearful of that. So many of them want to do their own businesses, be entrepreneurs on their own, because they're afraid if they just get in the system, somebody's going to downsize them. They're going to lose out. And so I'm thinking ahead to go, I'm not going to let that happen to me. Pretty interesting. For 2/3 of them, their future goal is to finish their education and start a career. 2/3. 43%, this is the interesting stat about this one. 43%, so getting close to 50%, their identity today is wrapped up in their educational and professional achievements. What they achieve is my identity. Wow. What this really is an opportunity for vocational discipleship. Chuck Bomar has been a friend for a long time. He served under Francis Chan a long time, did from basically cradle up through college ministries, and he would talk a lot about if you're going to work with young adults, this was his, now I don't think it's a complete definition at all, but I think it gets a good direction. He says if you have a guy who wants to be a plumber, best thing you could ever do is find a godly Christian man who is older, who is a plumber, and get them together. Show them this is how you be the best godly plumber you can possibly be, and let him disciple him. That's exactly what Barna was talking about. This stuff was, you make sure you use their vocation as a way to connect people with them who are godly, to show them the way of what it means to be godly in that field. It's an opportunity because they stress so much about this idea of their vocation being important. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this, and I know you know this, but they just identified it, is Gen Z lives in a post-Christian context. I always laugh a little bit, some websites that I see and things posted on Facebook, we act like this is, quote, the U.S. is a Christian nation, and it is so far past anything of that. There's been an increase of the nons or the nuns, depends how you want to say that. It is not the Catholic ladies. Although the lady did predict that, who was it? University? No, it was Loyola Marymount. She's doing, so we'll see next week, and she said they were going to lose from this point. So we'll see if that sister's, not that kind of nun, but the idea that they don't have anything. Their parents never took them to church. There's been, we'll talk about that just a little bit, but there are more people that have no church background, no religious background, and that's kind of where they're at with some of those pieces. Let me share a couple things that, again, I just found interesting, is that even though 66% of this generation would identify as Christian, here's the significant part. 4% say that they have a biblical worldview. So 2/3 will say, oh, I'm a Christian, but 4% say that they have a biblical worldview. That was 10% with boomers, 7% with Gen X, 6% with millennials. Now it's down to 4% with Generation Z. It's always fun hearing Ed's stories in Philly about people that he meets, and the stories of like, so, okay, it's Easter time. Like, Easter, is that when Jesus died? It's like, no, that's when he rose from the dead. So what's Black Friday? And what was your answer? Yeah, it's when you go shopping after Thanksgiving. I think you mean Good Friday. No background, no understanding of that. And even if they do, that it's the biblical worldview, 4%, pretty incredible. They really struggle, Gen Z really struggles with biblical stuff compared to science stuff. Huge struggle. And they tend to believe, quote, science over the Bible if you're having that discussion. Just an aside I thought was really interesting was listening to one writing on this. He said, the place to begin the discussion with Gen Zers about their lives being changed probably isn't to talk about creation. You probably talk about the resurrection of Jesus, who's a person who's real and wants to change your life. You start with that. Doesn't mean you don't get there, but you don't begin the conversation about creation, how the world began. I don't. Yeah. I'll have to look that up because I thought that was a really interesting perspective. Yeah, really helpful. A lot of times they were doing interviews. This was Barna who was saying this, that when they would do their interviews, the Christian kids would answer a lot of their questions with I don't know and I'm not sure. A lot of anxiety that comes on with some of those things, especially when you're dealing with tough questions that can't be Googled and an answer found within 30 seconds. Really tough. Morality and relativism, 34%, so 1/3 say that lying is wrong. 2/3 say lying really isn't a sin. They do say that a worse sin than pornography is not recycling. So the environment, incredibly important when it comes to that. They really are afraid, even our Christian kids, to share their faith because they don't want anybody ever to be upset with them about something like that, even though that's an opportunity for the truth. Found this intriguing and interesting. The most important thing, according to them, to have fulfillment in life, 43% said was your job. Your job, because again, it's related to career. That's where you find your identity. Your job is where you find fulfillment. What's interesting is up until this generation, number one or number two was always family and or religion. They are number, you ready for this? 5 and 6 with Gen Z. Family is number 5. Every other generation has been 1 or 2. But not just the idea of family, the idea of faith, religion has gone from 1 or 2 all the way to 6 with Generation Z because it's not been a part of their existence. It's not how they have been raised. Interesting stuff as you talk about how do you become an adult. It's now tied to financial independence and emotional maturity. Generation Y had those switched. Financial independence is the number one indicator if you are an adult. Interesting, isn't that? 1 out of 5 want to be married by age 30. 20%. One of their goals in life is to be married by 30. 9% want a child by the time they're 30. Less than 10%. Very, very, very. Identity is very much, you guys know this, I'm telling this to the choir. It is very wrapped up. Their identity is wrapped up in social media. We've known that, seen that. Face-to-face interaction is really hard. Not used to it. Not used to it. So some things that are good about Gen Z from some of the open and transparent. I kind of like that. I'll tell you what I'm thinking. All right, great. A blank slate and open to relationships. Practically passionate. They care about people and justice. They really can be fun and smart and creative. All those things have been said about them. I thought it might be helpful to share from Tim Elmore. He uses 6 words, and that's where those pictures come in. He identifies 6 things. I don't think that you'll find them to be opposite. I think it's just different ways of saying some of this information. But he will say that really Gen Z is largely seen as cynical. Now, if you think back and you think in pendulums between different generations, when you think about it, before Millennials, you have Gen X, probably about the parents of this group, and that largely described Gen X. Interesting as you look at some of those pieces. Another one, he would use the word that they are private. Now, what's funny is, yeah, you have everything on social media, but what they've learned from the millennial generation that you can get fired for what you post online. So it's a lot more secretive or private when it comes, even though they'll share some things. Facebook, by the way, with this generation in the last 7 years has lost 25% of this generation, of the Z generation. They don't use Facebook because, again, it has to do with the idea of privacy. Here's another one, entrepreneurial. We've talked about that a little bit. This one, I think, has some incredible opportunity for us in ministry. 72% of current high school students say they want to start a business. I think most of them are in photography. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just an observation, I think. They do know that life is hard and it takes work, which is a little different than the millennial generation. A little different. Here's another one that Elmore identifies, multitasking. Again, we're talking screen agers. You see how these things relate. They intersect. They prefer to look at like 5 screens at once, not 2 like millennials. And again, one of the descriptions, be ready to communicate with them looking around and not looking you in the eyes, because they're not used to that. Okay? Here's another one. They are, because of this, because of so much media, all these things, they are very aware what's going on, aware of their circumstances, situations. And then, again, this relates to some things we talked about. And I love the cartoon. I thought that was great from old people. I can't find my GPS. Oh, the sweet irony. So, technology reliant. According to surveys, according to Elmore, students in high school put technology in the same category as air and water. Just saw another study last week as I was reading that, and it said that students learn best not on screens and tablets, but they actually learn best with paper. What does that mean as we think about that? Does that have any bearing? I don't know, some things to think about for sure. So let's talk a little bit more about some things here of what we need to look out for, because there are unique challenges that come with this generation, but there are unique opportunities. I mean, I want to be the last person that goes, this generation's terrible. No, the opportunities that arise because of it, awesome. That's great. Light shines bright in the darkness, and when 4% believe in a biblical worldview, we got some opportunity, you know? So a challenge, 3 things that Elmore identified. One was, this might be a little surprising, but then to go, oh, that makes it, physical obesity. Physical obesity. They're growing up overweight, often sedentary because of more video games, tablets, television, computers. Used to be parents say, hey, go outside and play. Now parents say, go in the other room and play. So again, what we're doing in our youth, how could that have an effect? Do we always serve pizza and Coke? I've seen some youth ministries that are looking at what we actually serve food-wise. Now, personally, I still live on that stuff. But again, what do we do with those things? Whenever we're doing stuff now with high schoolers in our youth group and even young college, we don't even buy Cokes. We just buy water. And they prefer that. And it's cheaper. So physical obesity is something to think through. It's a challenge for this generation. Here's another one. Emotionally behind. Technology is doing them a bit of disservice, and they have a lower EQ and a lower emotional quotient. Not IQ, but EQ. 1/3 of kindergartners are developmentally behind. 1 out of 3 are not where they should be going into school. So what does that mean for catching up, for church, for children's ministries, for youth group? Things to keep in mind.
Superintendent, or our school system just hired a assistant superintendent for emotional and social development.
Wow.
Tracking, trying to teach them about media, deal with bullying, and address the emotionally behind.
Wow. Big pieces. Big pieces. Good. It's a great picture too, isn't it? I love that. And I like this picture even better. Socially challenged. If you ever watched the show, it cracks me up. If you've ever watched the show, watch the show. Thank you. Games tend to breed a low level of patience, low tolerance to adversity. There's an expectance of immediate reward. So Elmer tells a story about Jimmy Fallon having a gal on the Tonight Show, and a friend of hers in the Philippines flunked a class because she had no electricity. She couldn't study at night, and she couldn't get everything done. So this gal created a flashlight that actually is powered by the palm of your hand. And he had her on the show. And the amazing part was Fallon, as he shook his head no, Fallon said, I'm going to work for her one day. I know it. So you talk about, okay, that's a 15, 16-year-old. What's this mean? What's this look like? There are some things to capitalize on. And even from that story, the reason this gal said, I want to create this flashlight, wasn't because she wanted to create a flashlight. She wanted to help her friend that was on the other side of the world. Now, as a youth worker, I'm thinking, man, can't we capitalize on that? Loving people, caring for people, sharing. The greatest way that we could ever care for someone is to let them know that they're loved more than they could ever know by Jesus. So again, empathy, very empathetic. Here's another one. We can capitalize on innovation. I'm amazed at the number of adults who are running the computers and PowerPoints and whatnot. When the kids, anything goes wrong, the kids come back and fix it for us. Can't we just give that to them as a part of their life? I mean, it's what they do. Why are we doing announcements when you can shoot awesome videos talking about how awesome everything's going to be and how you're going to have awesome? Let the kids, they can be innovative. It gives them an opportunity. Let them own that. Here's another one. Can capitalize on their ambition. They have a desire, so let's use some of those things. They are smarter than boomers and far more ambitious than millennials. It's not my quote, but that was the description when it comes to those things. All right? So this, I find, all that sets the table, I think, for this from James Emery White. So how are they being raised? Because again, it's not in a vacuum. They were their parents. And so the way that they're being raised, he describes, James Emery White, by the way, great resource if you haven't seen it, Meet Generation Z, James Emery White. Take a picture of that. Really easy read, but very informative, very enjoyable. But the way that they're being raised by their parents, first thing you'll notice is they're self-directed. Now we remember the helicopter parent that's over, and you're like, yep, been dealing with them for a while. Now the swing is the other generation, because again, they're the pendulum swings. Now this generation is being parented in a way of, you decide. The nuns, we're not taking them to church. They'll decide on their own if they want. They just do their own thing. Now you do have some exceptions to this, that you still do have some helicopter parents, and some of you said, yes, I know. But you do have some of that still, but the reality is they're not protecting them at all. They're just kind of raising themselves. And with that comes their childhood is leaving more and more and more and more quickly. It's leaving more quickly. They're self-directed because they're raising themselves. They have underprotective parents, and their childhood is disappearing. And examples of that, do you know what GOY stands for? I had to look that up. Growing old younger. So you know what used to be for college, that's being brought down what they're doing in high school. What was being done in high school brought down to middle school. What was in middle school brought back down to elementary. Sean McDowell asked his dad, Josh McDowell, what do you see different in this generation? And Josh said to Sean, the questions I was getting on the college campus years ago, I'm now getting from middle schoolers. Interesting. Growing old, younger. Media and porn, they're kind of on their own. Now again, does that describe everyone? Not necessarily. But in generality, in the direction it's going, pretty interesting. Not only are they then having this impact of growing older, younger, having underprotective parents, and their childhood is more and more disappearing. What does that mean spiritually for this group? Well, number one, they're lost. They don't know Jesus. That is not how they've been raised. Again, on the whole, they're lost. The other thing is, because they aren't really being parented, underparented, if you would, they are what White describes as leaderless. Leaderless. So are there concerns when it comes to this? I mean, I think as youth workers, we would be concerned about certain things, especially the spiritual. But beyond that, interesting as far as some concern. One lady that I've done a good bit of reading on is named Jean Twenge. I think that's how you say her last name. She is a psychologist from San Diego State University. And if you do much as it relates to screens, as you relate to Gen Z, she's pretty prolific at writing and a good communicator. And this is what she says. She says that there are all kinds of problems and difficulties, and she brings that back to challenges of being with the screen so much. Let's see if I can find a couple stats here. The suicide rate amongst teen girls has doubled to a 40-year high. Suicide among teenage boys is up 30%. Twenge relates that back to the rise of the screen starting in 2010, and she's a researcher and well-respected. Anxiety and depression are higher than they've ever been amongst young people. And I'm sure numbers of us would be able to have stories about those kinds of things. So there is grave concern, not just from a Christian community, but the community at large. And her suggestion, one, is limit students to 2 hours a day with screens. Obviously, that's more of a parental role, but can we encourage that? Possibly. That was her input. Here's another one from some other reading I was doing. I've never done this. I don't know how to do this. I need to find a Gen Z student to do this. But instead of having our phones be in color, if you set it to grayscale, it's a little bit less attractive. Now, I did a little research and found some stuff from CBS News that said that 50% of parents and more than 70% of teens feel the need to text and respond to texts immediately. Half of youth admit they're addicted to their devices, and 60% of parents say their kids are addicted. Again, that would be from a social science perspective, not from a Christian leader, but implications for us. I think we can talk about those things, and I think they're pretty important. Last section I wanted to mention before we then talk about a couple things for a couple minutes would be this. How is Z different than Y? Again, I find this interesting. We move through this really, really quickly. The previous generation, millennials, were about spending money, but about saving. I'm amazed at the number of guys in my small group. Hey, you're going to go do this? No, I'm not going to spend the money. Really? Okay. Here's another one. How do they differ? Millennials will go to the mall. Z, of course, online. We've seen that more and more. Toys R Us can tell you more about that, right? It's changing. It's changing. Yeah, and now they can't. Thank you. Here's another one. How do they differ? Y was used to a more strong, robust economy. Z is recession. I mean, there are little concerns still about those things. I think about how that affected my parents going that many years ago. Those are some similarities to some of that. Okay? Here's another one. When it comes to social media, millennials, all of it, everything, as long as there's no tracking would be the response, and we saw that in some other research. They do not want to be tracked. So all of it to no tracking at all. Here's another one. What they are actually dealing with as far as entertainment, millennials watch all of it. But Z likes to create it. I mean, how do you leverage that in your ministry? Pretty good opportunity. Here's another one where they're just a little bit different. When it comes to athletics, which, I mean, some of us in this room are like, we thrive, and that's where we want to be. They do it for health, kind of. It's not what they really enjoy. Now, you'll find exceptions to that, but as a generation. So maybe some of you are going, hey, games are great and what you get of it, but I look over and we'll do some kind of a game like dodgeball, run around at our youth group, and I'm seeing like a third of the kids sitting on the side, not being disrespectful, just they're talking, and because that's not what they're really into. Others are. I mean, others want to pelt each other in the head with a dodgeball. That's awesome. But one for love it. The other for health. That's good. It's just different. And then attention spans, slightly greater. And Z, they're saying about 8 seconds. I do like the little button, though. I don't have a short attention span. Oh, look, squirrel. So then we come to this. Oh, and then the last one. I forgot about that one. The way of even communicating, text, obviously, but images. Using images and everything. So here's kind of some things for us to then talk about. We don't have much time because we have box lunches coming in pretty soon here, but do want to just take a moment to say, so if this is generally true of this next generation, and by the way, you have been exceptionally patient as we have talked about research. I mean, I don't know about you, but I just live for research. No, I don't. Okay, but it's interesting to maybe see it. So what does this have to do with the way that we run our ministries? So can you get back with a couple people and maybe not just everybody from your own group and church, but maybe a little discussion about that. And then we'll throw out some things, have some concluding thoughts, and then we'll pray. We need your help, Jesus. So I take a moment, see about what are things that you look at here to say, hey, those are things that should affect and impact our ministry. And I've got some concluding thoughts, and we'll go from there. Believers. One resource I use a lot is one that's been supplied by Neil Anderson, who's my dad's golfing buddy in Southern California for a long time ago. But he has a couple pages talking about who I am in Christ, scripture and concepts, and pointing them back. So even for believing kids, their identity is not found in social media and who they portray themselves to be, or their success in their career or their education. Their success really needs to be founded and their identity founded upon who Jesus says they are. So that's a resource that I think is incredibly helpful. And again, that's Neil Anderson's stuff, which I think is really good. They need role models. Your youth staff and you are needed now more than ever before. No question at all. They need to know about absolutes because they haven't been raised with that. They need scriptural understanding because that's not been taught to them. And I think they need equipped, and we could spend a long time talking about the word, that sometimes we think that if we just teach them information that they're going to get it, and that's not what equip means. It means we're showing them how to do it. And I think if there's something I look at the church in America today where it falls short, we might give information, and I'm not putting down scriptural preaching and truth, but that is not the same as walking side by side with the kids so that they understand how to apply those things in their life. I mean, we can teach all we want on evangelism, but the reality is, do they have any idea how to do that with their friends? We can talk about prayer and reading the Bible all we want, and that's great. But the reality is, have we equipped them? Do they know how to do that on their own? Ed, you were talking, we mentioned this a little bit, the difference between Acts 2 and Acts 17. Well, mention that, because that is huge, because we would say, we want people to know Jesus. But what does that have to do with this context? A couple other thoughts, and lunch is here, and we can keep talking about these things. Kids stay connected in church when they have cross-generational relationships. That's from the research and work of Mel Walker, Kara Powell, and Sticky Faith. So the opportunities we have as youth workers of connecting students, not just to us, but to the greater body of Christ, pretty incredible. Again, just trying to pull some pieces out. Students need hope. They have had anxiety and they have stress and suicidal thoughts like no other generation. And the opportunity to talk about Jesus and what he means in those stressful, overwhelming circumstances. I think that we need to understand, especially as we look at a book called, is it Everyday Church, I believe, the reality that we don't, if we're expecting kids to come to us, the study was done in 2000, there's guys in England, 50%, if you were asked to come to church, 50-50 shot people will come. And it's going down 1% every year. Well, that was 18 years ago. So you're about 32. So it's about a 1/3 chance if people are asked to come to church for an event, for something, Easter, probably about a 1/3 chance they'll come. So thinking about how that affects our ministry, if we think that the ministry is all about them coming to us, it's getting worse every year. We have got to flip that, and youth ministry more and more and more is going to have to be going to them. That is a big flip because, as Ed even referred to, we can do a great job programmatically, and that's the way we think. That is not going to be the way that we best reach this generation. We're going to have to go to them. It's a little different. Everyday Church was the name of that book. Last thing I would mention as a phrase that I heard somewhere, it's not new with me, but when it comes to students, more than anything, they don't need as much a sage on the stage as much as they need a guide by their side. And that does not minimize the teaching and preaching of truth, but the reality, what kids need more than somebody talking at them, is someone beside them talking with them. I even think about what that means as I work with high school students in the summertime, and I've seen this over the last number of years. It used to be that there's something going on, you want to challenge a kid. It is like this. I mean, we're in this. And anymore, I've learned that whether it's correcting behavior, correcting a hard attitude, challenging them either, whatever, if we go for a walk and we are side by side, or we're going for a drive and having that conversation, or we're even working on a manual labor project together, painting something, side by side is so much easier with this generation than this. So not changing what we're talking about sometimes as much as the way it will be perceived can be incredibly, incredibly important, rather than being a sage from the stage, a guide by their side.